Everyone. This is important because a major decision just came out of Congress that could quietly affect how fast your benefits are processed, how public services function, and how stable government agencies remain going forward. The House just voted to overturn a Trump executive order that removed bargaining rights for over 1 million federal workers. And if you don't understand what changed and why it matters, you may be left confused the next time services slow down or rules suddenly shift again. Some changes can improve efficiency, while others can reduce protections and create long-term problems if you're not prepared. And right now, both are happening at the same time. And here's the part most people don't realize. This decision touches everything from how quickly Social Security cases get processed to how veterans get care to how stable government jobs really are. Before we go further, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop a quick comment and let me know. When you hear about Congress voting on issues like this, do you usually feel hopeful, frustrated, or just tired of it all? Your perspective matters, and I want to understand where you're coming from as we work through this together. All right, so let's slow this down and talk through what actually happened, because the headlines alone don't tell the full story. On December 11th, the House passed a bill called the Protect America's Workforce Act. It passed by a vote of 231 to 195. What's important there is that this wasn't just one party voting yes. About 20 Republicans joined Democrats to support it. That's not common these days, especially on labor issues. And that alone should tell you something. This wasn't seen as a small or symbolic vote. It was a response to 2 executive orders President Trump signed earlier this year. In a political climate where party lines are usually rock solid, seeing 20 Republicans break ranks is significant. It suggests that this issue resonated beyond typical partisan divides. Some of these Republicans represent districts with large numbers of federal employees. Others simply believe that the executive orders went too far. Whatever their reasons, their votes mattered. The fact that this bill even reached the floor is noteworthy. It came through a discharge petition, which is a procedural tool that allows lawmakers to force a vote even when leadership doesn't want one. It requires 218 signatures, a majority of the House. Getting that many signatures across party lines shows the level of concern and determination behind this effort. Representatives Jared Golden, a Democrat from Maine, and Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Pennsylvania, led the charge. Golden's district includes shipyard workers and veterans who would be affected by the executive orders. Fitzpatrick has a history of supporting labor rights, even when it puts him at odds with his party. Together, they built a coalition that couldn't be ignored. Now, those executive orders, they were issued in March and then expanded in August, and what they did was remove collective bargaining rights from large parts of the federal workforce. We're talking about over 1 million workers, possibly closer to 2/3 of all federal employees. These orders told more than 40 federal agencies to cancel or end their union contracts. The justification from the administration was national security. The legal hook came from a law passed back in 1978, the Civil Service Reform Act, which allows presidents to limit union activity in agencies tied to intelligence or security work. But here's where things get complicated, and this is where a lot of people started raising concerns. The list of agencies affected didn't just include intelligence agencies like the CIA or NSA, where you might expect national security restrictions. It included places like the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Commerce, Treasury, parts of Homeland Security, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and even sections of the State Department. Think about what these agencies do. The Department of Veterans Affairs runs hospitals and processes disability claims for millions of veterans. The Commerce Department handles patents, trademarks, and economic data. Treasury manages federal finances and tax collection. NOAA tracks hurricanes, forecasts weather, and monitors climate. These are agencies filled with people doing paperwork, processing claims, running hospitals, tracking weather, helping veterans. Everyday work that most of us rely on without thinking about it. The August executive order expanded the restrictions even further. It added NASA employees, the National Weather Service, the National Environmental Satellite Data and Information Service, parts of the Bureau of Reclamation that operate hydropower facilities, the Patent and Trademark Office, and even the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which funds Voice of America and other international broadcasting services. So the question a lot of lawmakers asked was, is this really about national security, or is this about weakening unions more broadly? And that's where the House stepped in. Now, from the Trump administration's point of view, the argument was about efficiency. Officials said unions were slowing things down. They pointed to something called official time. That's time federal workers are allowed to spend on union-related duties instead of their regular jobs. House Oversight Chair James Comer said that in 2024, federal employees spent more than 3 million hours on union business, costing taxpayers over $200 million. And at first, those numbers sound big. I mean, 3 million hours, $200 million. That catches your attention. It sounds like a massive waste of taxpayer money, right? But context matters. And this is where it's important to slow down and look at the full picture. Those 3 million hours represent less than 1/10 of 1% of all federal work hours in a year. Think about that. Out of the billions of hours federal employees work every year, union-related time accounts for 0.069% of the total. That's not even 1/10%. And that $200 million, while it sounds like a lot in absolute terms, that's about 0.003 of 1% of total federal discretionary spending. We're talking about 0.003% of a $6.8 trillion budget. To put it in perspective, if you earned $50,000 a year, that would be like spending $1.50 on union activities. So, yeah, it's money, but it's not the kind of number that usually drives massive policy shifts unless there's something else going on. The scale of the response, stripping bargaining rights from over 1 million workers, seems disproportionate to the problem being cited. Supporters of the House bill argued that collective bargaining isn't about blocking reforms. It's about having a structured way for workers to raise concerns, fix problems early, and avoid chaos. And remember, federal unions can't negotiate pay or benefits, and they can't strike. This is a critical point that often gets lost in the debate. Federal employee unions are fundamentally different from private sector unions. They operate under much tighter restrictions. They cannot negotiate salaries or benefits packages. Those are set by Congress through legislation. They cannot go on strike. Federal law explicitly prohibits strikes by federal workers. What they mostly negotiate are working conditions, schedules, safety rules, and grievance processes, things that affect morale and turnover more than budgets. For example, a union might negotiate about how many employees need to be on duty during a particular shift to handle the workload safely. Or they might address concerns about outdated equipment that makes jobs harder or less safe. Or they might establish a fair process for handling workplace disputes before they escalate. These aren't luxury demands. They're the kinds of workplace protections that help retain experienced employees and maintain institutional knowledge when workers feel they have a voice and a fair process for addressing concerns. They're more likely to stay in their jobs and perform well. And speaking of turnover, that's where some lawmakers started pointing to history. One congressman, Mark Pocan from Wisconsin, brought up what happened in his state back in 2011 when collective bargaining rights for public employees were sharply reduced under Governor Scott Walker's Act 10. What followed was a mass exit of experienced workers. In education alone, applications to teaching programs dropped dramatically. School districts struggled to fill positions, services suffered, and once that experience and institutional knowledge walks out the door, it's hard to replace. Wisconsin became a case study in what happens when you suddenly and drastically reduce worker protections. Teachers left the profession in droves. Many districts, especially in rural areas, couldn't find qualified replacements. Class sizes grew. Programs were cut. The ripple effects lasted for years and continue to be felt today. The same pattern emerged in other states that followed similar paths. It's not just about the individual workers who leave. It's about the knowledge they take with them, the training that's lost, and the cost of recruiting and training replacements who often don't stay long themselves because the conditions that drove the first wave to leave haven't changed. So the concern here wasn't just about fairness to workers. It was about whether the government can function well if people feel demoralized, unstable, or constantly under threat of sudden policy changes. Can you effectively serve the public when half your experienced staff has left and the other half is looking for the exits? Another interesting part of this story is how federal workers themselves reacted, and this is something you don't always see in traditional coverage. Online forums and comment sections lit up after the House vote. Federal employee discussion boards, Reddit communities, and social media groups dedicated to government work all buzzed with reactions. Some workers were relieved, genuinely relieved, just to see Congress push back at all. For them, this bill wasn't about politics. It was about respect and stability, a signal that someone noticed what was happening. After months of feeling like their jobs and rights were under constant attack, seeing a bipartisan majority vote to restore protections meant something. One worker commented that it was the first time in months they felt like someone in power actually cared about federal employees. Another said it gave them hope that maybe the constant chaos would slow down, that maybe they could focus on doing their jobs instead of worrying about the next policy bombshell. But at the same time, there was a lot of skepticism. Many workers immediately said, okay, but the president will veto it. And they're probably right. President Trump has made it very clear that he sees these executive orders as necessary. He's framed them as essential to his vision of government efficiency and national security. And unless 2/3 of both the House and the Senate vote to override a veto, which is extremely unlikely, the bill may not become law. A veto override requires 67 votes in the Senate and 290 votes in the House. Getting those supermajorities when Congress is closely divided and when most Republicans remain loyal to Trump would be nearly impossible. So you end up with this strange mix of hope and resignation. People are glad the House acted, but they don't expect it to last. And that emotional whiplash, it shows up over and over again in federal service right now. Workers celebrate small victories while bracing for the next setback. What's more, many workers tied this fight to bigger, longer-term plans. Some mention Project 2025, a broad conservative blueprint for reshaping the federal government. Whether you agree with it or not, the fact that workers are talking about it tells you something. They feel like their jobs, their protections, and even the structure of their careers are constantly being reconsidered at the highest levels. Project 2025 is a comprehensive policy agenda developed by the Heritage Foundation and other conservative groups. It proposes significant changes to how the federal government operates, including making it easier to fire federal employees, reducing the overall size of the workforce, and limiting union power. For federal workers, it represents a long-term threat that goes beyond any single executive order. Even if they don't know all the details, federal employees sense that there's a broader effort to fundamentally transform their work environment. The executive orders on collective bargaining feel like one piece of a larger puzzle. That creates a constant background anxiety that makes it hard to focus on work or plan for the future. And then there's shutdown fatigue. You see this a lot. Anytime Congress fights over workers' rights or budgets, federal employees immediately think, here we go again, another shutdown threat, another bargaining chip. Even if a shutdown doesn't happen, the constant possibility wears people down. It affects planning, mental health, and financial stability, especially for workers who live paycheck to paycheck. Many federal employees can't afford to miss a single paycheck. When shutdowns loom, they have to decide whether to keep paying their mortgage or buy groceries, whether to put off medical care or risk overdraft fees. This chronic uncertainty takes a toll. Studies have shown that repeated exposure to job insecurity, even when the worst-case scenario doesn't happen, can lead to anxiety, depression, and physical health problems. Federal workers are living in a state of perpetual stress. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but how does this affect me if I'm not a federal worker? And that's a fair question. Here's the thing. When federal workers lose bargaining rights, it often leads to higher turnover. Higher turnover means delays. Delays in Social Security processing, delays in veterans' benefits, delays in disaster response, delays in permits, payments, and paperwork that ripple out into the private economy. Think about the services you or your family members rely on. Are you waiting for Social Security disability approval? That decision is made by a federal employee. Are you a veteran seeking health care or disability benefits? Federal employees process those claims. Did your community get hit by a hurricane or wildfire? Federal employees coordinate the disaster response and distribute aid. When experienced federal workers leave because conditions become untenable, the people who replace them, if they can be replaced at all, need months or even years to reach the same level of competency. In the meantime, everything slows down. Applications sit in queues longer. Phone calls go unanswered. Mistakes increase because new employees don't have the institutional knowledge to catch problems. This isn't theoretical. After previous rounds of federal workforce reductions and policy changes, average processing times for various services increased measurably. Social Security disability claims, which already take months to process, took even longer. Veterans waited longer for appointments. Small businesses waited longer for permits and licenses. On the flip side, critics argue that unions protect underperforming workers and slow down necessary reforms. And that concern shouldn't be brushed aside. Any large system needs accountability. No one benefits when employees who aren't doing their jobs are shielded from consequences. But accountability doesn't always mean stripping away all worker protections. Sometimes it means improving management, investing in training, and fixing outdated systems. Sometimes it means giving managers better tools to document performance issues and follow fair disciplinary procedures. Sometimes it means updating technology so that work can be done more efficiently. What this House vote really represents is a disagreement over how to make government better. One side believes stronger executive control leads to efficiency. The other believes stable labor protections lead to better long-term performance. And neither side is completely wrong, which is why this debate keeps coming back. As we keep going, it's worth noting that this vote didn't happen in a vacuum. Earlier this year, a federal judge temporarily blocked the executive orders, finding that the administration had likely overstepped its authority under the 1978 law. Then a higher court, the Court of Appeals, reversed that decision, allowing agencies to move forward. Some departments already ended union contracts. The Department of Veterans Affairs canceled agreements covering tens of thousands of workers. The Department of Commerce did the same. Other agencies sent notices that contracts would be terminated. Others are still in limbo, waiting to see how the legal challenges play out. The American Federation of Government Employees, the largest union representing federal workers, filed multiple lawsuits challenging the orders. They argue that the administration is misusing the national security exception, applying it to workers who have nothing to do with intelligence or security operations. They argue that the orders are retaliatory, designed to punish unions for opposing the administration's policies. So even with a House vote, there's uncertainty everywhere. Workers don't know if their union contracts are still valid. Agencies don't know what procedures to follow. Everyone is operating in a gray area, waiting for the next court decision or policy announcement. As this bill heads to the Senate, its future is unclear. Only one Republican senator has co-sponsored the Senate version so far. That makes passage difficult. The Senate is even more closely divided than the House, and with most Republicans still firmly aligned with President Trump, finding enough votes to pass this bill will be a significant challenge. Union leaders are pushing hard, warning that if this fails, future executive actions could go even further. They're mobilizing their members to contact senators, organizing rallies, and making the case that this is about more than labor rights. It's about the basic functioning of government. Some senators from states with large numbers of federal employees might feel pressure to support the bill regardless of party. Others might be swayed by arguments about government efficiency and service delivery. But it's an uphill battle. And guess what? Regardless of how you feel about unions, this raises a bigger question about balance of power. How much authority should a president have over the civil service? How much should Congress step in? And where do workers fit into that equation? The framers of the Constitution designed a system of checks and balances. Congress makes the laws. The president executes them. The courts interpret them. But over time, presidents have accumulated significant power to act unilaterally through executive orders. This case tests the limits of that power. Can a president fundamentally reshape the federal workforce without congressional approval? Should Congress have more say in how federal employees are treated? These are constitutional questions with practical consequences. The answers we arrive at will shape government operations for decades to come. They'll determine whether future presidents have even more unilateral power or whether Congress reasserts its role as a check on executive authority. These topics can feel heavy, but they're worth understanding. Behind every policy debate are real people whose lives are affected. Federal workers who don't know if they'll have a job next month, veterans waiting for benefits who don't know if their claims will be processed on time, seniors relying on Social Security who don't know if their payments might be delayed. This isn't just about abstract principles of labor relations or government efficiency. It's about whether the people who serve the public, who process your tax refund, inspect your food, forecast the weather, protect national parks, and provide health care to veterans, have the stability and protections they need to do their jobs well. It's also about what kind of government we want. Do we want a federal workforce that's flexible and responsive, where the president can make quick changes to improve efficiency? Or do we want a federal workforce that's stable and protected, where employees have rights that can't be swept away with the stroke of a pen? There are legitimate arguments on both sides, and finding the right balance is genuinely difficult. Drop your thoughts in the comments, even if it's just a feeling or a gut reaction. Do you think federal workers should have collective bargaining rights? Do you think the executive orders were necessary for national security? Do you think Congress should have more control over federal workforce policy? Your perspective matters. These decisions are made by elected officials who are supposed to represent us. When constituents speak up, lawmakers pay attention. When districts make clear what they value, representatives respond. Your voice, your comment, your call to your senator's office, these things have more impact than you might think. And as this situation continues to develop, stay informed. Watch what happens in the Senate. Pay attention to court decisions. Notice if your Social Security claim takes longer than expected, or if veterans in your community report delays in care. These are the real-world consequences of policy decisions made in Washington. Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time to understand a complex issue that doesn't have easy answers. And thanks for caring about how your government functions and how the people who work for it are treated.